Rowan Thorne learned to make herself invisible long before she understood why it mattered. At 18, she had perfected the art of existing in the margins of her own home. She moved through the sprawling Thorne estate like a shadow, always 3 steps behind her golden sister, always 2 rooms away from her parents' notice. The kitchens were her kingdom now, the only place where her presence served a purpose. Tonight, like every night, she prepared dinner for a family that would never invite her to the table. The estate sat deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, a testament to old money and older bloodlines. The Thorne family prided themselves on their pedigree: 4 generations of alphas, 3 centuries of unbroken lineage, a reputation built on strength, dominance, and the kind of genetic superiority that could only come from careful, calculated breeding. Rowan was the crack in that perfect foundation. She worked in silence, her movements efficient and practiced. Roasted venison with blackberry reduction for her father, who only ate meat rare enough to bleed. Delicate honey-glazed carrots for her mother, arranged in geometric precision, because Margot Thorne believed chaos on a plate reflected chaos in the soul. For Briar, her sister, something light, something that wouldn't interfere with the careful presentation being crafted upstairs. The presentation that would save the family from ruin. Rowan had learned to hear conversations through walls, not because she possessed any supernatural ability, but because invisible people develop survival skills the visible take for granted. She heard her father's voice drifting from his study, rough with desperation masked as authority. "The Frost King arrives tomorrow night. Everything depends on this." Her mother's response came measured, deliberate. "Briar is ready. I've been preparing her for weeks. The scent amplification oils alone cost $3,000, but they're worth it. She'll be irresistible. She'd better be. We owe KS Frost $3.2 million, Margot. If this doesn't work, we lose everything. The land, the pack status, our seat on the Southern Council. Everything our family built for 300 years gone because of my mistakes." A pause, then Margot, colder than Rowan had ever heard her. "Not mistakes, Garrick. Investments that didn't pan out. There's a difference. The bank doesn't care about semantics, neither does Frost. Then we make him care about Briar. She's beautiful, fully awakened, and from an impeccable bloodline. What more could an alpha want in a mate?" Rowan's hands stilled over the cutting board. Mate. They were offering Briar as a bride to erase gambling debts and Shell Corporation loans that had finally come due. Her 16-year-old sister packaged and perfumed like a commodity. She waited for the guilt to come. The protective, older sister instinct that should have made her want to march into that study and demand they find another way. But the guilt never arrived. Only a dull, familiar ache that reminded her she had no right to demand anything. Briar would survive this. Briar always survived. She was everything Rowan wasn't: beautiful, powerful, wanted. Rowan was just the girl who made dinner. She finished plating the meals, arranged them on the antique silver tray her mother insisted upon, and carried them toward the dining room. The tray was heavy, but she'd learned to manage. She'd learned to manage everything alone. The dining room was empty when she entered. They would eat in 20 minutes after Margot finished Briar's final preparations. Rowan set the plates in their designated positions, each one precisely measured from the table's edge. Her mother checked with a ruler sometimes. She was turning to leave when she heard them. Not her parents this time, but Briar and Margot, their voices floating down from the second-floor landing. "I don't understand why it has to be me," Briar was saying, and there was something in her voice Rowan had never heard before. Fear, maybe, or the beginning of understanding that beauty came with a price tag. "Because you're perfect," Margot replied, and the word carried no warmth. "Because you awakened on schedule with a wolf the color of sunlight. Because when you walk into a room, every alpha in it can smell your bloodline from 50 feet away. You are exactly what this family needs you to be." And Rowan, the question hung in the air for 3 seconds too long. "Your sister," Margot said carefully, "is not part of this equation. She never was." Rowan pressed herself against the door frame, hidden in the shadows where she belonged. She'd heard worse. She'd heard her father call her a genetic dead end. Her mother referred to her as the family's unfortunate miscalculation. She'd heard the pack doctor tell them at 16 that there was no hope. No wolf would ever emerge. No scent would ever develop. She would remain forever exactly what she was: a null. A nothing. But something about tonight felt different. Something about the way her mother's voice had gone carefully neutral when Briar asked about her. The same voice Margot used when discussing things that needed to be handled quietly, efficiently, without fuss. Rowan left the dining room through the servant's entrance and made her way back to the kitchen. She had work to do. Tomorrow's preparations to start. a menu to plan for the arrival of the Frost King, though she doubted she'd be allowed anywhere near the formal dinner. She was elbow deep in bread dough when the fragment of conversation drifted through the kitchen window from the garden below. Her father and mother taking an evening walk. Old habit from better days. Good thing we handled Rowan early, Margot was saying. If her grandmother's blood had awakened naturally, it won't, Garrett cut her off. Dr. Holloway confirmed the compound worked perfectly. 14 years and not a single complication. She'll never know what she could have been. Rowan's hands stilled in the dough. Compound. 14 years. Handled. The words arranged themselves in her mind, trying to form a picture she couldn't quite see. Couldn't quite let herself see because seeing would mean understanding, and understanding would mean accepting that the past 14 years of being told she was broken had been something else entirely. Something deliberate. She pulled her hands from the dough, fingers trembling. Washed them in the deep ceramic sink, watching the water run clear, then cloudy with flour, then clear again. The window was open just enough to let in the mountain air, cool and sharp with the promise of autumn. Her parents' voices had faded into the distance. Rowan stood alone in the kitchen in the house where she'd lived her entire life and felt the foundation of everything she'd believed about herself begin to crack. But there was no time to examine those cracks. No luxury of falling apart when dinner still needed to be cleaned up and tomorrow's breakfast prepared. She'd learned young that invisible girls didn't get the privilege of emotional collapse. So she dried her hands, braided the bread dough, and set it to rise overnight. And when she finally climbed the back stairs to her small room in the servants' wing, because of course she didn't sleep in the family quarters, hadn't since her null status was confirmed, she lay in the darkness and tried not to think about compounds in 14 years, in the way her mother had said, handled like Rowan was a problem that required solving. She was still awake when the sun rose. The Frost King arrived at exactly 7 o'clock the following evening. Rowan watched from the kitchen window as the convoy rolled up the long gravel drive. 3 black SUVs, their windows tinted so dark they looked like rolling voids. They moved with the kind of precision that suggested military training or something older, something that predated human warfare. The mountains around the estate had gone silent. No bird song, no wind through the pines. Even the insects seemed to hold their breath as the vehicles came to a stop in the circular drive. "Get away from that window." Rowan turned to find her mother standing in the kitchen doorway, resplendent in a deep emerald gown that cost more than most people's cars. Margot Thorne had been beautiful once. Now she was something harder than beauty, something preserved and perfected until all the softness had been refined away. "You are to stay in this kitchen." Margot continued, her voice low and sharp. "Do you understand me? You do not show your face. You do not make a sound. If the Frost King asks about staff, you are visiting relatives in Charlotte. Are we clear?" "Yes, ma'am." Margot's eyes swept over her daughter with the kind of assessment usually reserved for livestock. "Good. Make yourself useful. There's champagne that needs to be poured. I'll send Carol in to retrieve it." She left without another word, the emerald gown whispering against the hardwood floors. Rowan moved to the commercial refrigerator and retrieved the champagne. Dom Perignon, 12 bottles, chilling for exactly 4 hours as Margot had specified. She arranged them on a silver tray alongside crystal flutes that caught the light like captured stars. Through the crack in the kitchen door, she could see into the grand foyer. Her father stood at the base of the curved staircase, his posture rigid with the kind of tension that came from owing money to men who could destroy you with a word. Beside him, Briar descended the stairs like a vision from some other, more perfect world. Her sister wore white silk that clung and flowed in all the right places. Her blonde hair had been arranged in an intricate updo that had taken Margot's stylist 4 hours to perfect. The scent amplification oils Margot had mentioned, orchid and magnolia, and something darker, muskier, designed to trigger every instinctual alpha response, created an almost visible cloud around her. Briar was 16 and looked like she'd been crafted by committee to represent the absolute pinnacle of werewolf genetics. And she looked terrified. Rowan saw it in the way her sister's hands trembled as she reached the bottom of the stairs, in the too bright smile that didn't reach her eyes, in the way she kept glancing toward the kitchen as if hoping to find an escape route through the servants' quarters. But then the front doors opened and every thought in Rowan's head went absolutely silent. The man who entered the Thorne estate didn't walk. He prowled, each movement deliberate and economical, the kind of physical control that suggested violence held perpetually in check. He wore a black suit tailored so precisely it looked like it had been painted onto his frame. His hair fell in stark white waves against the darkness of his clothing, and his skin held that peculiar translucent quality of true albinism, pale enough that Rowan could see the faint map of veins beneath the surface. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Ice blue so pale they were almost colorless, ringed with the faintest touch of red that made them look like frozen lakes with blood suspended in their depths. They swept the foyer with predatory precision, cataloging exits and threats and weaknesses, with the efficiency of a creature who'd survived by being smarter and more dangerous than everything around him. This was Caius Frost, the Albino King, the nightmare the Southern Packs whispered about when they thought no one was listening. He looked like a tragic angel carved from winter itself. Behind him came another man, massive and scarred, his presence somehow both protective and threatening. The Beta Rowan assumed. She'd heard stories about the Frost King's second, a man who'd reportedly torn through an entire rival pack to protect his alpha. Alpha Frost. Garrick's voice came out rough, and he had to clear his throat to continue. Welcome to our home. We're honored by your presence. Caius said nothing. His gaze continued its systematic sweep of the room, passing over the expensive artwork, the imported marble, the crystal chandelier that had cost more than most people earned in a year. Finding all of it lacking, apparently because his expression never changed from that mask of aristocratic indifference. May I present my daughter, Garrick continued, desperation bleeding into his formal tone. Briar Thorn, she's 16. Caius interrupted, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Recently awakened, orchid and magnolia scent base amplified with synthetic musk compounds. Briar flinched as if she'd been struck. Margot stepped forward, her smile brilliant and brittle. Alpha Frost, perhaps we could discuss the terms of— You owe me $3.2 million, Caius said, still not looking at any of them directly. The debt comes due in 48 hours. I came to collect. Of course, Garrick said quickly, but we hope to propose an alternative arrangement, a merger of bloodlines, as it were. My daughter Briar comes from an impeccable lineage. Her great-grandfather was Alpha of the Smoky Mountain Pack for 40 years. Her mother's line traces back to the original European migrations. She would make a worthy mate for an Alpha of your standing. Finally, Caius looked at Briar, really looked at her, his ice-pale eyes traveling from her carefully arranged hair to her trembling hands. He took one step towards her. Two. Close enough that Briar had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Close enough that the sheer, overwhelming presence of him made her stumble backward, her carefully trained poise crumbling under the weight of his attention. Caius leaned in slightly, drew a slow breath through his nose, his nostrils flaring as he analyzed the complicated cocktail of scents surrounding her. Then he straightened, turned away, dismissed her as thoroughly as if she'd never existed. No, he said simply. Margot made a sound like she'd been punched. I beg your pardon. But Caius wasn't listening. His head had tilted slightly, like a wolf catching a scent on the wind. His eyes had gone distant, unfocused, and Rowan watched with mounting confusion as his entire body went absolutely still. He was searching for something. The foyer was thick with scents. Garrick's expensive cologne, Margot's French perfume, Briar's amplified oils, the imported orchids arranged in crystal vases throughout the room. Layer upon layer of carefully curated olfactory information, all of it designed to impress, to overwhelm, to dominate the senses. But somewhere in that ocean of scent, there was a void. A blank space where scent should be, but wasn't. And to an Alpha with senses as violently sharp as Caius Frost's, that absence was a beacon. Rowan's breath caught as his gaze locked onto the kitchen doors. No, she thought. No, this isn't happening. But he was already moving his long strides, eating up the distance between the foyer and the kitchen. Garrick called after him, something about misunderstandings and alternative options, but the Frost King ignored him completely. The kitchen doors slammed open with enough force to crack the decorative molding. Rowan had backed herself against the industrial refrigerator, the champagne tray abandoned on the marble counter. She wore her usual uniform faded gray sweater with holes in the elbows, jeans worn soft from too many washes, her dark hair pulled into a messy knot, because who bothered with styling hair no one would see? She was shaking, couldn't stop shaking. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go, and running from an Alpha was the kind of mistake that got you killed. So she stood there pressed against cold steel and waited for whatever came next. Caius filled the doorway. Up close, he was even more overwhelming, the kind of presence that made the air feel thick and hard to breathe. His pale eyes locked onto hers, and Rowan watched something pass through them. Something that looked almost like pain. His chest rose and fell rapidly like he'd been running. One hand came up slowly, almost unconsciously, to press against his sternum, as if something inside him had just shifted violently out of place. Alpha Frost. Garrick appeared in the doorway behind him, his face sheet white with horror. Please forgive this intrusion. This is just the help, a defective creature. We keep her out of sight for obvious reasons. Briar is waiting in the... What's your name? Caius asked, and his voice had gone rough, strained, like the words were being dragged out of him against his will. Rowan's voice came out barely above a whisper. Rowan, sir. Rowan, though, he repeated, and the way he said it made it sound like he was tasting the syllables, testing their weight and texture. She's a null, Garrick was saying, desperation making him reckless. No wolf, no scent, no value whatsoever, a genetic failure. If you'll just come back to the foyer, we can discuss the debt, Caius said, cutting him off mid-sentence. His eyes never left Rowan's face. Is $3.2 million. Yes, of course, and Briar will more than... I'll take her. The kitchen plunged into absolute silence. Garrick gaped like a fish drowning in air. I beg your pardon. Caius turned his head just slightly, just enough to pin Garrick with a look that promised unspeakable violence. I said I will take her. Your debt will be cleared by morning. Thomas Abernathy will wire the property deeds back to your accounts. Consider this transaction complete. But she's nothing, Margot's voice came from somewhere behind Garrick sharp with disbelief. She's a null. She doesn't even have a wolf. She's utterly useless to a man of your stature. Briar is the obvious choice. Beautiful, powerful, from perfect bloodlines. I don't recall asking for your opinion. Caius's voice dropped to a register that made the temperature in the kitchen feel like it had plummeted 10 degrees. I will take Rowan Thorne. The debt is paid. If you ever approach her, speak of her, or attempt to contact her again, I will return to North Carolina and burn this estate to ash with everyone inside it. Do we have an understanding? Margot made a choked sound that might have been a sob. Not from love, Rowan understood dimly. From shock. From the realization that her golden child had just been rejected in favor of the family embarrassment. Caius looked back at Rowan, extended one pale hand, his long fingers steady despite the tension radiating from every line of his body. Walk with me, Rowan, he said quietly. She stared at that offered hand like it might be a trap. Like taking it would mean stepping into some new kind of cage she didn't have the tools to understand. But the alternative was staying here, in this kitchen, in this house, with parents who just tried to sell her sister and were now watching their defective daughter get purchased by a monster. Rowan placed her trembling hand in his. His skin was burning hot. The transaction took less than 10 minutes. Garrick tried to insist she pack a bag, though Rowan suspected this had more to do with maintaining appearances than any concern for her welfare. Caius shut him down with a single look. She needs nothing from this house, he said flatly. Everything she requires will be provided. So Rowan left the only home she'd ever known wearing faded jeans, a sweater with holes in the elbows, and a pair of canvas sneakers that had seen better years. No photographs because there were no photographs of her. No keepsakes because she'd never been allowed to keep anything that mattered. No tearful goodbyes because the only person who might have cried was Briar. And Briar stood frozen at the top of the stairs, her perfect face streaked with mascara, watching her sister disappear. Their eyes met for just a moment. Rowan saw guilt there. Fear. Maybe the beginning of understanding that their parents were something other than what they'd always pretended to be. Then Caius's hand on the small of her back was guiding her toward the door, and Briar's face disappeared from view. The night air hit Rowan like a physical force, cold and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and approaching autumn. The mountain peaks loomed black against the star-scattered sky, indifferent witnesses to whatever was unfolding below. 3 SUVs waited in the circular drive, their engines running, exhaling white vapor into the darkness. The scarred man, the beta, stood beside the middle vehicle. He opened the rear door as they approached, his expression completely unreadable. "Ma'am," he said, the courtesy somehow making everything more surreal. Rowan slid into the leather seat, her canvas sneakers looking absurdly out of place against the luxury interior. She pulled her knees to her chest instinctively, trying to make herself as small as possible, taking up as little space as she could manage. Caius slid in beside her. He was massive. That was the first coherent thought Rowan managed as the door closed, sealing them into the intimate space together. Tall enough that his head nearly brushed the ceiling, broad enough that his shoulders took up more than half the seat, he radiated heat like a furnace, and that strange scent she'd caught in the kitchen pine and ozone, and something crisp like winter mornings filled the enclosed space until she felt dizzy with it. The convoy began to move, tires crunching on gravel, leaving the Thorne estate behind. Rowan stared out the window as the only home she'd ever known disappeared into the darkness, waited for the fear to come, the panic, the reality of what had just happened to crash over her and drown her in its implications. But she felt nothing. Just a strange, hollow numbness like she'd been carved out and left empty. "You're safe." The words were so unexpected that Rowan actually jumped. She turned to find Caius watching her, his ice-pale eyes reflecting the dashboard lights in strange ways. "I don't—" She stopped, unsure what she'd even been about to say. "You're safe," he repeated slower this time. "I know you have no reason to believe that, but it's true." "You bought me," Rowan said, and her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Distant, like it belonged to someone else. "For $3.2 million, to clear my father's gambling debts." "Yes." "Why bueno?" Caius was quiet for a long moment. The SUV navigated the winding mountain roads with practiced ease, descending toward the private airstrip where his jet waited. Through the windshield, Rowan could see the lights of the small airport glowing in the valley below. "Your father didn't tell you," Caius said finally. It wasn't a question. "Tell me why you're a null." The word hit her like a slap. She'd heard it before, of course. Heard it whispered behind her back, seen it written in medical charts, lived it every single day of her life since her wolf failed to awaken on schedule. But somehow hearing it from his mouth in this space made it feel more real, more permanent. "I know why," she said quietly. "I'm defective, a genetic failure. Dr. Holloway confirmed it when I was 16. "Dr. Holloway," Caius repeated, and there was something in his voice that made the name sound like a curse. "Did he explain the science to you? The genetics?" "He said sometimes the bloodline just breaks down, that it's rare but it happens, that there was nothing anyone could have done." "He lied." Rowan turned to look at him fully. "What?" But Caius had gone silent again, his jaw tight, his pale hands clenched into fists against his thighs. He looked like he was fighting some internal battle, weighing words before he spoke them, calculating the cost of truth. The SUV came to a stop on the tarmac. Through the window, Rowan could see the private jet, sleek and dark, its stairs already lowered in invitation. Or command, she couldn't tell which. "Come," Caius said, opening his door. "We have a long flight ahead, you should rest." He climbed out before she could formulate a response, leaving her alone in the back seat with 1,000 questions and no answer. The beta appeared at her door, offering his hand to help her down. "Name's Soren, ma'am. I'll be looking after your security." "My security, him?" Rowan took his hand, automatically let him guide her out onto the tarmac. "Why would I need security?" Soren exchanged a look with Caius that Rowan couldn't interpret. "Best let the Alpha explain that, ma'am." The jet's interior was exactly what Rowan would have expected from a billionaire Alpha, all cream leather and polished wood, subtle lighting that made everything look warm and expensive. There were 8 seats, each one large enough to qualify as a throne, a conference table, a bar stocked with bottles that probably cost more than her parents' car. Caius gestured to one of the seats near the window. "Sit, we'll be in the air shortly." Rowan sat. The leather was soft enough to feel like an embrace, and the seat was heated, which meant her fingers finally started to thaw from the nervous cold that had been gripping her since the kitchen. She watched through the window as Soren and 2 other men conducted a security sweep of the aircraft, watched as they spoke into radio's coordinated movements, treated this like a military operation rather than a simple flight. "Who are you afraid of?" she asked as Caius settled into the seat across from her. "I'm not afraid of anyone," he replied, and it wasn't arrogance, just fact. "But there are those who would use you against me if they knew about you. So we take precautions. Use me how I'm nobody." "You keep saying that." Caius leaned back in his seat, and for the first time since she'd met him, some of the terrible tension in his shoulders seemed to ease. "You keep saying you're nothing, you're nobody, you're worthless. Who taught you to speak about yourself that way?" Rowan opened her mouth, closed it. The answer was obvious, but saying it out loud felt like betrayal, like admitting something she wasn't supposed to acknowledge. "Everyone," she said finally. "Everyone taught me that." The jet's engines began their warm-up sequence, a low thrumming that Rowan felt in her bones. Soren appeared in the cabin doorway, gave Caius a brief nod, then disappeared toward the cockpit. They were cleared for takeoff. Rowan watched North Carolina fall away beneath them. Watched the mountains shrink to wrinkles in dark fabric, the lights of small towns becoming scattered constellations. Everything she'd ever known reduced to geography and distance. She was exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the past hour was draining away, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that made her entire body ache. She hadn't slept the night before, hadn't eaten since breakfast, and even that had been just toast and coffee. The cabin air was warm, too warm. She was shivering anyway. Suddenly, a heavy weight settled over her shoulders. Rowan jumped startled, then realized Caius had draped his coat over her. The same black coat he'd worn into her parents' house, still carrying his body heat, still saturated with that scent of pine and ozone that made her head spin. "You're cold," he said simply, not looking up from the tablet he was now scrolling through. "Thank you," she whispered. She pulled the coat tighter around herself. It was ridiculous, the size of it. The sleeves hung past her fingertips. The hem pooled in her lap. But it was warm and it smelled like safety, even though she had no logical reason to believe that's what it represented. An hour passed in silence. Caius worked on his tablet, occasionally making notes on a legal pad in handwriting, so precise it looked mechanical. Rowan stared out the window at the darkness, watching clouds drift past like ghosts. The questions finally overwhelmed her. "Why did you buy me?" The words came out hoarse from disuse. "My father was right. I'm broken. I can't shift. I can't give you pups. I can't defend territory, or fight, or do any of the things a wolf is supposed to do. If you wanted a servant, you could have hired a human for a lot less than $3.2 million. Caius stopped scrolling, set the tablet down slowly, deliberately, turned his head to look at her with those unsettling, ice-pale eyes. "You are not a servant, Rowan," he said softly, "and you were not bought to be a slave. Then what? Why am I here?" He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. His jaw worked like he was chewing on words, testing them, finding them all inadequate. "You were bought," he said finally, each word chosen with surgical care, "to be removed from a house that was slowly killing you. That's all you need to know right now." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed, "it's not. But it's the only one I can give you tonight." Rowan wanted to push, wanted to demand real answers, full explanations, some kind of logic that would make sense of the past 2 hours. But the exhaustion was pulling at her now, making her thoughts fuzzy and slow. "I don't understand any of this," she said, and hated how small her voice sounded. "You will." Caius picked up his tablet again, but his eyes had gone soft in a way that made him look almost human, almost vulnerable. "Get some sleep, Rowan. Maine is a long way from here." She meant to stay awake, meant to keep watch, stay vigilant, maintain some kind of control over a situation that had spiraled so far beyond her ability to manage, it felt like drowning. But the coat was warm, the seat was comfortable, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, no one was looking at her with disappointment or disgust, or the particular brand of resignation reserved for broken things that couldn't be fixed. Rowan's eyes drifted closed. She slept, and dreamed of white wolves with blood-red eyes prowling through forests made of ice and shadow, searching for something they'd lost a very long time ago. Rowan woke to the sound of wind against glass and the smell of salt water. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The bed beneath her was too soft, the sheets too fine, the room too quiet. Then memory crashed back like a wave, and she remembered North Carolina, the kitchen, ice-pale eyes, $3.2 million. She'd been bought. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it settled over her shoulders like an old familiar coat, just another weight to carry in a life built from accumulated burdens. She sat up slowly, taking inventory of her surroundings. The bedroom was massive, decorated in warm creams and deep blues that reminded her of sand and ocean. A fire burned in the stone hearth, despite the fact that she couldn't remember anyone lighting it. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over pine forests, so dense and dark they seemed to swallow light. This was Maine, the Frost Territories, as far from North Carolina as she could get without leaving the country entirely. Rowan had no memory of getting from the jet to this room. She must have fallen asleep so deeply that Caius had carried her. The thought made something twist uncomfortably in her chest. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had touched her with anything resembling gentleness. A soft knock at the door made it chum. "Come in," she said, her voice rough from sleep. The woman who entered was perhaps 60, with steel gray hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes the color of storm clouds. She wore a crisp black dress and carried herself with the kind of quiet authority that came from running large households for demanding employers. "Miss Thorne," she said, her accent carrying the flat vowels of northern New England. "I'm Freya. Alpha Frost asked me to see to your needs." "I don't have any needs," Rowan said automatically. Freya's mouth twitched in something that might have been amusement. "Everyone has needs, child. The question is whether they've been taught to acknowledge them." She set down the tray she'd been carrying on the small table near the windows. "I've brought breakfast. You'll eat it." It wasn't a suggestion. Rowan found herself obeying without thought, crossing to the table where Freya had arranged what looked like enough food for 3 people. Scrambled eggs with herbs, thick-cut bacon, fresh bread still warm from the oven, sliced fruit arranged in careful patterns, coffee that smelled like it had been brewed strong enough to wake the dead. "I can't eat all this," Rowan said. Then eat what you can. Freya poured coffee into a delicate china cup. You're thin as a rail, girl. When's the last time you had a proper meal? Rowan couldn't remember. She'd been so focused on preparing food for others that eating had become an afterthought, something to do quickly in stolen moments between other obligations. She picked up a piece of bacon. It was perfect crispy at the edges, but still tender in the middle, seasoned with something that made her taste buds sing. She ate it slowly, savoring every bite. Freya watched her with the intensity of a hawk studying prey. The Alpha said you're not to leave this floor without escort. There's clothing in the wardrobe all in your size. Bathroom's through that door. If you need anything, use the phone on the nightstand. It connects directly to my office. How long am I supposed to stay here? Rowan asked. As long as it takes. As long as what takes? Freya's expression softened slightly. For you to be safe, child. That's all that matters right now. She left before Rowan could formulate another question, the door clicking shut with a finality that made the room feel like a very comfortable cage. Rowan ate because Freya had told her to, and because refusing felt like it would require more energy than she possessed. The food was good. Better than good. Each bite tasted like someone had put actual care into its preparation, which was such a foreign concept that it made her throat tight. After breakfast, she explored the room more thoroughly. The wardrobe Freya had mentioned was actually a walk-in closet larger than her bedroom back in North Carolina. It was filled with clothes in her exact size, everything from casual jeans and sweaters to formal gowns she couldn't imagine ever having occasion to wear. There was a Montclair coat in deep charcoal cashmere, so soft it felt like touching clouds, and boots lined with fur. Someone had measured her. Someone had shopped for her. Someone had anticipated her arrival and prepared for it. Caius had been planning this for longer than the transaction night. The realization made her skin prickle with unease. 3 weeks passed in a strange, suspended reality. Rowan lived like a ghost on the third floor of the Frost compound haunting rooms that were too beautiful for someone like her, wearing clothes that cost more than her family had ever spent on her entire life. Freya brought meals 3 times a day, each one a small work of culinary art. Rowan ate them alone, watching through the windows as the main autumn progressed from gold to bare branches. She saw Caius exactly twice. The first time was on her 5th day. She'd been standing at the window watching snow begin to fall in fat, lazy flakes when she felt his presence behind her. She didn't know how she knew it was him. She just did. Some new sense she'd developed in this strange place that attuned to his specific frequency. You're not eating enough, he said without preamble. Rowan turned. He stood in the doorway, still wearing his suit from whatever business had occupied his day. He looked exhausted, dark circles bruising the pale skin beneath his eyes. Freya brings enough food for an army, she replied, and you pick at it like a bird. He stepped into the room, and Rowan noticed the way he kept a careful distance between them, at least 8 feet, like he'd calculated the exact safe radius and refused to cross it. You need your strength. For what of us? The question hung between them. Caius's jaw tightened, that tell she'd learned to recognize when he was weighing how much truth to offer. For what's coming, he said finally. Then he left, and she didn't see him again for 6 days. The second time was late at night. Rowan had been unable to sleep, her body clock still confused by the upheaval when she heard the sound. Footsteps in the hallway outside her room. Back and forth, the same stretch of floor being worn down by restless pacing. She opened her door to find Caius 3 levels down in the grand hall, visible through the ornate railing. He was pacing like a caged animal, his white hair disheveled, his tie loosened, his usual control fraying at the edges. He must have sensed her watching because he stopped abruptly and looked up. Their eyes met across the distance, and Rowan saw something raw and aching in his expression before he shuddered it behind ice. Go back to bed, Rowan, he called up, his voice rough. Please. She obeyed, but she could still hear him pacing long after she closed the door. Freya was her only regular companion, and the housekeeper proved to be as practical as she was perceptive. She brought not just food, but books, a laptop with carefully monitored internet access, and eventually conversation. You barely eat, Freya observed one afternoon, setting down a plate that Rowan had picked at for 20 minutes. You barely sleep if the circles under your eyes are any indication. And you spend all day staring out that window like you're waiting for something. What are you waiting for, child? For it to make sense, Rowan said quietly. For any of this to make sense. Freya settled into the armchair across from her, an unusual breach of the invisible line between staff and whatever Rowan was supposed to be. The Alpha paces the floor 3 levels down, every night. Did you know that? Rowan's hand stilled on the book she'd been pretending to read. I've heard him. He feels your anxiety through the bond. Every spike of fear, every moment of confusion, it tears at him. You're driving the man to the edge of madness, and you don't even know it. What bond? Rowan demanded. I don't understand what that means. I don't have a wolf. How can there be a bond when half of the equation doesn't exist? Freya was quiet for a long moment, studying Rowan with those storm cloud eyes. You think you're broken because that's what they told you. Your father, your mother, their pet doctor. They told you that you were defective, and you believed them because children believe their parents even when those parents are lying. Dr. Holloway ran tests. Dr. Holloway was paid to confirm what they needed him to confirm. Freya leaned forward, her voice dropping low and urgent. Listen to me, Rowan Thorne. Nature doesn't make mistakes with fated mates. If Alpha Kaya says you're his mate, then you are, regardless of what you can or cannot currently do. There's a reason your wolf is silent, and the Alpha intends to find out what that reason is. He said I was bought to be removed from a house that was killing me, Rowan said. What did he mean? I think you know, Freya replied gently. I think part of you has always known, even if you couldn't let yourself see it. Rowan thought about the conversation she'd overheard. Good thing we handled Rowan early. 14 years, compound. Worked perfectly. They did something to me, she whispered. Didn't they? Freya didn't answer, but the sadness in her eyes was answer enough. That night, Caius came to her room. It was past 2 in the morning when her door opened without warning. Rowan sat up in bed, heart hammering, until she recognized his silhouette in the doorway. He looked worse than she'd ever seen him. The careful control he usually wore like armor had crumbled entirely. His white hair was wild, his shirt untucked, his eyes rimmed with red that had nothing to do with his albinism and everything to do with exhaustion and something else. Something that looked like barely contained anguish. Caius, her voice came out uncertain. I need to tell you something, he said, his voice rough, gravel. I've been trying to find the right way to say it, the right time, the right words. But there are no right words for this, so I'm just going to show you. He crossed the room and set a thick manila folder on her bed. The logo on the front belonged to Quest Diagnostics, a human laboratory based in Boston. What is this? Rowan asked, though part of her already knew. Part of her had known since that night in the kitchen when she'd heard her parents talking. I couldn't use the pack doctors, Caius said. He stood at the foot of her bed, hands clenched at his sides like he was physically restraining himself from some action she couldn't predict. Any test run through our medical system would have been flagged. Questions would have been asked. So I had Soren draw your blood 3 nights ago while you were sleeping. We sent it to a private human facility under an alias. The results came back an hour ago. Rowan's hands trembled as she opened the folder. The pages inside were dense with medical terminology she didn't fully understand. Lab values and reference ranges and highlighted sections that meant nothing to her untrained eye. I don't know what I'm looking at, she said. Your blood work shows astronomical levels of heavy metals, Caius said, each word carefully controlled. Mercury, lead, cadmium, levels high enough that a human would have died from organ failure years ago. But you're not human. Your werewolf healing factor kept you alive, kept processing the poison, kept you functional. Barely. Rowan's vision blurred. She blinked hard, trying to focus on the papers. There's also a synthesized compound, Caius continued, and now his voice had gone deadly quiet. A slow-release variant of aconitum. Wolfsbane. Someone has been injecting you with poison since you were approximately 4 years old. The compound was specifically designed to bind to your nervous system and paralyze your wolf gene before it could ever manifest. It suppressed your scent, your strength, your ability to shift. Everything that should have made you powerful. The room tilted. Rowan gripped the folder hard enough to crumple the pages. 14 years, she whispered. They poisoned me for 14 years. Yes. The single word fell like a stone into still water ripples, spreading out to touch everything she'd ever believed about herself. Memory rose unbidden, her mother's voice sweet and concerned. Time for your vitamin shot, sweetheart. You need extra help. Her father watching from the doorway with cold calculation. Doctor Holloway with his sympathetic smile and his carefully crafted lies. The pack members who'd looked at her with pity, never knowing they were pitying the victim of a crime, not the victim of genetics. Why? The word came out broken. Why would they do that to me? Caius moved then, closing the distance between them before his control could stop him. He sat on the edge of her bed close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, see the faint translucent veins beneath his pale jaw. I had my intelligence network dig into the Thorne family ancestry, he said quietly. Your great-grandmother's name was Lyanna Silvermoon. She was the last known pure silver wolf of the Southern Highlands. The bloodline was thought to be extinct for 80 years. But it wasn't extinct, it was just hidden, waiting dormant in your genetic code. Rowan stared at him. I don't understand. If you had awakened to your true potential, Caius said, his ice-pale eyes searching her face, you would have been the most powerful alpha the Southern Territories had seen in a century. You would have eclipsed your father completely. You would have been the rightful alpha of the Blue Ridge Pack by blood inheritance. So Garrick Thorne did what weak men do when they fear being surpassed by someone stronger. He crippled you. He poisoned his own daughter to keep the power he'd stolen from her grandmother's line. The folder slipped from Rowan's numb fingers. Papers scattered across the blue comforter like leaves in a storm. 14 years of believing she was broken. 14 years of shame and isolation, in the particular kind of loneliness that comes from thinking you're fundamentally defective. 14 years of her mother's sweet lies and her father's cold disappointment and her own relentless self-hatred. All of it built on a foundation of deliberate, calculated cruelty. A sound escaped her throat. Not quite a sob, not quite a scream. Something raw and wounded that she'd been holding back since the moment Dr. Holloway had pronounced her a null at 16 and her parents had looked relieved instead of devastated. Caius made a rough sound deep in his chest. Then his arms were around her, pulling her against his chest, and Rowan shattered. She cried like she'd never allowed herself to cry before. Cried for the little girl who'd thought the weekly shots were medicine. Cried for the teenager who'd believed she was worthless. Cried for all the years she'd spent making herself small and invisible because taking up space felt like a crime when you were fundamentally defective. Except she'd never been defective. She'd been sabotaged. Caius held her through it all, one large hand cradling the back of her head, the other spread across her spine. He didn't offer empty platitudes or tell her everything would be fine. He just held her while she fell apart, solid and warm and present in a way no one had ever been for her before. The heat between them was impossible to ignore now. It flared with every point of contact, every place where his skin touched hers. Rowan felt it in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with something fundamental shifting into place. When she finally pulled back, gasping for air, that Caius's eyes had gone dark. Not with anger, but with something else. Something that looked like longing and restraint, locked in brutal combat. I'm sorry, he said, his voice rough. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this knowledge. But you needed to know the truth. The withdrawals, Rowan said, pieces clicking together with horrible clarity. You said withdrawals would start. When the poison leaves my system, your wolf is going to wake up, Caius finished. His hands were still on her shoulders, steady and warm. And Rowan, I need you to understand it's going to hurt. The suppression has been in place for so long that when it breaks, when your wolf finally claws her way to the surface, it's going to feel like your body is tearing itself apart. How long? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Days, maybe a week, maybe longer, I don't know. This kind of long-term suppression is rare. But I'll be here. I promise you I won't leave you alone through this. Rowan looked at him, really looked at him. Saw the exhaustion carved into every line of his face, the way his hands trembled slightly, where they rested on her shoulders, the rigid control it took for him to maintain even this much distance when everything in his body clearly screamed to pull her closer. This bond you keep talking about, she said, the one Freya mentioned. You feel what I feel. Every spike of fear, Caius confirmed quietly, every moment of pain, every second of confusion and loneliness and despair. I've felt all of it for 3 weeks and it's been slowly destroying me. But I couldn't come to you. Couldn't risk igniting the bond fully before you understood what was happening. Because once that bond locks into place, once your scent shifts to match mine, the entire pack will know. And you're not ready for that yet. You're not safe yet. Why not? His jaw tightened. Because an unawakened, defenseless Luna is a target. Anyone who wants to challenge my authority would kill you to break my mind and spirit. So I've kept you hidden, kept you close but separate, kept myself half mad with wanting to touch you while knowing I couldn't. Not yet. Not until you're strong enough to survive what comes next. Rowan's mind spun with implications. When I'm strong, when my wolf wakes, then you'll be my equal, Caius said, and there was something fierce and proud in his expression. Then no one will dare touch you. Then you'll take your rightful place as Luna of the Northern Territories, and God help anyone who tries to stand in your way. He stood abruptly, putting distance between them like it physically hurt to do so. The withdrawals will start soon. Tomorrow maybe, the next day at the latest. I'm having medical equipment brought to your room. Freya will monitor your vitals. And I'll be close by. Always close by even when you can't see me. He was at the door before Rowan found her voice again. Caius, he stopped hand on the doorframe but didn't turn around. Thank you, she said quietly, for telling me the truth, for finding me, for getting me out of that house before I spent the rest of my life believing their lies. His shoulders rose and fell with a deep breath. You don't need to thank me for doing what should have been done years ago. Sleep, Rowan. You're going to need your strength. Then he was gone, and Rowan was left alone with scattered medical reports and the dawning realization that everything she'd ever believed about herself had been a carefully constructed lie. The pain started 36 hours later. Rowan woke just after dawn with a fever that made her skin feel like it was burning from the inside out. She kicked off the blankets, then immediately pulled them back as chills racked her body hard enough to make her teeth chatter. Freya appeared within minutes, as if she'd been waiting for this. She pressed a cool hand to Rowan's forehead and made a soft, concerned sound. It's starting, she said. I'll get the alpha. No. Rowan gritted her teeth against a wave of nausea. Don't bother him. I'm fine. Child, you're many things right now, but fine isn't one of them. Freya was already moving toward the phone. He gave strict orders. The moment this started, I was to inform him immediately. Caius arrived before Freya had even hung up, which meant he must have been close by. Probably in his office 3 floors down, the one Rowan had learned he rarely left these days. He took one look at her and went very still. How high is the fever? 104.2, Freya reported, checking the thermometer. Rising fast. Get cold compresses, ice packs. We need to bring it down before it causes damage. Caius moved to the side of the bed, his pale eyes scanning Rowan's face with clinical precision. Rowan, can you hear me? Can you understand what I'm saying? I'm not delirious yet, she managed. Just feel like I'm being cooked alive. The poison is leaving your system. Your body is fighting 14 years of accumulated toxins all at once. It's going to get worse before it gets better. He wasn't wrong. Over the next 3 days, the fever spiked and dropped in unpredictable patterns. Rowan would burn until Freya had to pack her in ice, then shake with chills so violent she thought her bones might crack. She couldn't keep food down, could barely keep water down. Freya managed to get broth and electrolyte solution into her in small sips, but even that felt like swallowing glass. Through it all, Caius remained. He sat in the armchair by the fire, a constant presence in her peripheral vision. Sometimes he worked on his laptop, the blue light making his pale features look even more otherworldly. Sometimes he just watched her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. On the 4th day, the bone pain started. Rowan woke screaming. It felt like her skeleton was trying to break apart from the inside, every joint grinding against itself, her spine bowing with pressure that had nowhere to go. She couldn't breathe through it, couldn't think through it, could only scream and scream until her throat was raw. Caius was at her side instantly, his hands hovering over her like he wanted to touch her, but was afraid he'd cause more damage. Breathe, Rowan. Try to breathe. I know it hurts. I know. But you have to breathe. Make it stop, she gasped between screams. Please make it stop. I can't. The anguish in his voice was palpable. I would if I could. I would take it from you if there was any way. But this is the poison leaving. This is your wolf starting to wake. You have to endure it. The pain lasted for hours. Days and nights began to blur together. Freya changed her sweat-soaked sheets. Caius held cold compresses to her forehead. Someone she wasn't sure who managed to get pain medication into her, but it barely touched the agony radiating from her bones. On day 7, something changed. Rowan was lying in a haze of pain and exhaustion when she felt it. A flutter in her chest like a second heartbeat, trying to sync with her own. She pressed a hand to her sternum, felt the strange double rhythm pulsing beneath her palm. Caius, she whispered. He was at her side immediately. What is it? What's wrong? There's something in my chest. She looked up at him with wide eyes. Something moving, something alive. His expression transformed. The worry and exhaustion fell away, replaced by something that looked almost like joy. That's her, he breathed. That's your wolf. She's waking up, Rowan, finally waking up after 14 years of forced sleep. It feels strange, Rowan said, like I'm not alone in my own body anymore. You're not alone, Caius agreed. You never will be again. The second heartbeat grew stronger over the next 2 days. With it came other changes. Rowan's hearing sharpened until she could pick out individual conversations 3 floors below. Her sense of smell intensified until the world became an overwhelming symphony of scents. She could smell the pine trees outside her window, the smoke from the fireplace, Freya's lavender soap, and underneath it all, Caius's distinctive scent of winter storms and frozen forests. On day 9, she heard the whispers. Her window was open to let in cool autumn air when voices drifted up from somewhere below. 2 pack members, their words carrying clearly in the still night. The Alpha is compromised. Rowan recognized the voice as belonging to Astrid, the lead warrior who'd sneered at her that first night. He's been holed up on the 3rd floor for over a week, neglecting his duties, all for some scentless human. She's not human, another voice replied, male uncertain. She's his what? Astrid cut him off. His mate. How can a null be anyone's mate? He's deluded himself. And while he wastes time playing nurse to a dying girl, our enemies are circling. Blackwood's people have been spotted near the southern border. The Coastal Alliance is asking questions about succession. The Alpha King is showing weakness, and weakness gets you killed in our world. Rowan's hands clenched in the sheets. She wanted to march downstairs and confront Astrid, wanted to defend Caius from accusations of weakness, wanted to do something other than lie in this bed being the source of his problems. But she couldn't even stand without the room spinning. On day 10, everything changed. Rowan woke in the deepest part of night with the sensation of electricity running beneath her skin. The double heartbeat in her chest had become a constant presence, so synchronized with her own pulse that she couldn't tell where she ended and the wolf began. She sat up slowly. The fever had finally broken. The bone pain had faded to a dull ache. She felt weak, hollowed out, but clear-headed for the first time in over a week. Caius was asleep in the armchair, his head tilted back at an angle that would leave his neck aching when he woke. He looked younger in sleep, some of the harsh lines smoothed from his face, vulnerable in a way he never allowed himself to be while conscious. Rowan was about to lie back down when the phone on her nightstand rang. Caius woke instantly, every muscle tensing, his eyes snapping open with the alertness of a predator. He grabbed the phone before the second ring. What? His voice was rough from sleep, but there was no confusion in it. When how many understood, I'm on my way. He hung up and looked at Rowan. Something in his expression made her blood run cold. What's wrong? She asked. Border breach, southern perimeter, at least a dozen wolves, possibly more. He was already moving toward the door. Stay here, lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone except Freya. Do you understand it, Caius? Do you understand? He repeated harder this time. Yes. He paused in the doorway, looked back at her one more time. If I don't come back, don't say that. If I don't come back, he continued as if she hadn't spoken. Soren has instructions. He'll get you somewhere safe. Somewhere not even the pack can find you. You'll be protected. You'll be provided for. You're coming back, Rowan said firmly. So we don't need to have this conversation. Caius's mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hallway, fading into the distance. Rowan sat alone in the sudden silence, that strange double heartbeat pounding in her chest. The wolf inside her was fully awake now. She could feel it pacing, restless, agitated by the danger surrounding its mate. Wait, Rowan thought. When did she start thinking of Caius as her mate? But she knew the answer. Somewhere between the blood test revelation and the bone pain and the endless nights where he'd sat vigil beside her bed, refusing to leave even when exhaustion made him sway in his chair. Somewhere in there, her understanding had shifted. He wasn't her captor. He wasn't even really her savior, though he'd certainly saved her from a slow death by poison. He was her mate, her fated mate, the other half of something she'd never known she was missing. And he'd just left to face an unknown threat while she lay useless in this bed. The wolf in her chest snarled its displeasure. Rowan closed her eyes and reached for that presence inside her, tried to make contact with this creature that had been sleeping for so long. The response was immediate and overwhelming, a flood of sensation and instinct and fury that she didn't know how to process. She saw through 2 sets of eyes for a dizzy moment, felt phantom limbs she didn't possess, tasted the air with senses she'd never had before. Then the connection broke and she was just Rowan again, gasping for breath, her heart racing. But something had shifted. Some barrier between her and the wolf had thinned. She was close now, so close to the transformation that had been stolen from her. All she needed was the right trigger. Rowan lay back down, pulled the blankets around herself, and tried to ignore the sick feeling of dread pooling in her stomach. Tried not to think about Caius facing threats in the dark while she hid in this room like a child. Tried not to wonder what would happen if he didn't come back. The wolf inside her growled low and dangerous. Soon, it seemed to say, soon you'll be strong enough to stand beside him. Soon you'll be able to protect instead of being protected. Soon. But tonight, all Rowan could do was wait and pray that soon came before it was too late. The border breach was a false alarm. Caius returned 3 hours before dawn, exhausted and frustrated. Some juvenile wolves from a neighboring pack had gotten drunk on stolen whiskey and crossed into Frost territory on a dare. Soren had handled it with minimal violence and maximum humiliation, sending them back to their alpha with their tails literally between their legs. But the damage was done. Rowan had spent those 3 hours in a state of heightened anxiety that left her shaking and nauseous. The wolf inside her had paced and snarled, furious at being caged, while her mate faced potential danger. When Caius finally appeared in her doorway, whole and unharmed, the relief that crashed through her was so intense it left her dizzy. "You're okay," she breathed. "I'm fine. Just drunk teenagers being stupid." He crossed to her bed, studying her face with concern. "But you're not fine. Your heart rate is through the roof. I can hear it from here." "I was worried," Rowan admitted. The wolf was worried. She stopped, unsure how to explain the overwhelming urge to transform and fight that she'd felt, despite having no idea how to actually do either of those things. "She wanted to protect me," Caius finished quietly. "That's what mates do. They protect each other." He sat on the edge of her bed, and for the first time in 10 days he let himself touch her. Just his hand over hers, his palm warm and steady, but the contact sent electricity racing up her arm. The bond between them flared bright and fierce, and Rowan gasped at the intensity of it. Caius pulled back immediately. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." "Don't apologize." Rowan caught his hand before he could withdraw completely. "I'm not fragile. The fever broke. The bone pain is mostly gone. I'm not going to shatter if you touch me. You're still recovering. I'm recovering faster now." It was true. She could feel her strength returning by the hour, her body healing itself with preternatural speed now that the poison was finally being flushed from her system. "The wolf is helping. I can feel her." Caius's thumb brushed over her knuckles, a gesture so gentle it made her throat tight. "Good, that's good. But Rowan, I need you to understand something. The next few days are going to be critical. Your wolf is waking, but she's still weak, still vulnerable. And there are people in this pack who have noticed my distraction, who have noticed the resources being devoted to protecting someone they see as worthless." "Astrid," Rowan said. His eyes narrowed. "You heard her. Day 9. The window was open. She thinks you're compromised. She thinks I'm dying, and you're wasting time on a lost cause." "Astrid has always been ambitious," Caius said, his voice gone cold and dangerous. "She wants to be Luna, has wanted it since before I even became Alpha. But wanting and having are very different things, and she's about to learn that lesson the hard way. What are you going to do?" "Nothing for now. Let her scheme. Let her whisper to whoever will listen. When you finally stand before this pack as my Luna, and they see what you really are, every word she's spoken will turn to ash in her mouth." Rowan wanted to believe him, wanted to have his confidence, but she'd spent 18 years being told she was nothing, and confidence wasn't something you rebuilt overnight. "What if I can't shift?" The fear spilled out before she could stop it. "What if the poison damaged something permanently? What if the wolf wakes, but I can't transform, and I'm just stuck like this forever, in between not quite human and not quite—" "Hey." Caius cupped her face in both hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Listen to me. Your wolf is there. I can feel her presence growing stronger every day. When the time comes, when you're ready, she will emerge. And Rowan, when she does, this entire territory is going to kneel before you. How can you be so sure? Because I've seen what you come from. I've traced your bloodline back 5 generations. I know what runs in your veins. The Silver Moon line doesn't produce weak wolves. They produce queens." He kissed her forehead, then a gesture of such tender reverence that it made tears prick at her eyes. Then he stood, putting distance between them again, though Rowan could see the effort it cost him. "Rest," he said. "Build your strength. The storm is coming, and when it breaks, I need you ready." 3 days later, the storm arrived. It was the new moon, and Maine was being battered by a blizzard that had blown in from the Atlantic with a violence that felt almost personal. Snow fell so thick that visibility dropped to 0. Wind shrieked around the compound, rattling windows and piling drifts against the walls. Rowan had been feeling strange all day. Restless. Edgy. The wolf inside her was agitated, pacing and snarling at shadows. Something felt wrong, but she couldn't identify what. She was standing at her window watching snow spiral in the darkness when the lights went out. Every light in the compound. All at once. Leaving her in absolute darkness, broken only by the faint glow of banked coals in the fireplace. Rowan's heart began to pound. This wasn't a power outage. The Frost compound had backup generators that should have kicked in automatically. This was something else. Something deliberate. She heard screaming from somewhere below. Not pain exactly. Battle cries. The distinctive sounds of wolves tearing into each other with tooth and claw. The compound was under attack. Rowan moved toward the door on instinct, then stopped herself. Caius had told her to stay in this room, to lock the door, to wait for him or Freya. But every instinct she possessed was screaming at her to move, to fight, to do something other than hide while her mate faced danger. The wolf in her chest was no longer pacing. She was throwing herself against Rowan's ribcage like a prisoner desperate for freedom. The bedroom door exploded inward. Wood splintered and flew in all directions as the heavy oak was simply torn from its hinges. Rowan screamed and scrambled backward, but there was nowhere to go. The man who stepped through the wreckage was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, with a dark hair and a jagged scar across his chin. He wore tactical gear and carried the scent of other wolves on him. Many other wolves. "Well, well," he said, his voice rough with amusement. "Astrid wasn't lying. The terrifying albino king has lost his mind over a helpless little stray." Behind him, Astrid herself appeared, her eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. "Hello, Null. Sorry about the door, but we couldn't let you run and hide before the real fun started." Rowan's back hit the wall. She had nowhere to go, no way to defend herself, no wolf to call on, despite the fact that she could feel the creature inside her going absolutely insane with rage and fear. "Get out," she managed, and was shocked to hear her voice come out layered deeper than it should be. A guttural growl vibrating beneath her human vocal cords. The scarred man, this had to be Draven Blackwood, the rival Alpha Astrid had contacted, laughed. "Oh, this is going to be fun. I'm going to gut you right here, little stray. Then I'm going to take Frost's head and mount it on my wall. The Northern Territories will be mine by dawn." He lunged for her. A deafening roar shook the entire structure. Draven barely had time to turn before a blur of white and black crashed into him, throwing 250 pounds of muscle and malice across the room like he weighed nothing. Caius had arrived. He hadn't fully shifted into his wolf form, but he was close. His eyes blazed crimson, not the pale ice blue Rowan was used to, but burning red like coals. His claws were fully extended, dripping with blood from the invaders he'd torn through to get here. His canines had elongated into wicked fangs, and when he spoke, his voice was barely human. "You dare enter my home." The words came out as much growl as language. "You dare touch my mate." Draven recovered quickly, already shifting mid-motion. Bones cracked and reformed with sickening speed, and suddenly a massive brown timber wolf stood where the man had been. Easily 400 pounds of predator built for killing. He collided with Caius in a tangle of fur and claws and snapping teeth. The fight was brutal and immediate. They tore through Rowan's bedroom like twin hurricanes, destroying furniture, shredding curtains, cracking the stone fireplace surround. Blood sprayed across the cream walls in abstract patterns. Rowan pressed herself against the wall, unable to look away, unable to help. But Astrid hadn't forgotten about her. The warrior pulled a silver dagger from her boot, its blade gleaming dully in the firelight. "You know what the beauty of this plan is?" she said conversationally, stalking toward Rowan, while the two alphas destroyed each other behind her. "Even if Frost wins, even if he kills Draven, it won't matter. Because I'm going to kill you. And when you die, the mate bond will break him. His mind will shatter, and I'll be there to pick up the pieces and rule at his side." She raised the dagger, silver-coated and designed to cause maximum damage to werewolf healing. "If I kill you," Astrid hissed, "he falls." Something inside Rowan snapped, not broke, not cracked. Snapped, like a dam that had been holding back an ocean finally giving way under impossible pressure. The pain was instant and absolute. It felt like every bone in her body was breaking simultaneously, like her skeleton was being torn apart and reassembled according to a blueprint she'd never seen. Her spine bowed vertebrae, grinding and reforming. Her skull reshaped itself with cracks that sounded like gunshots. Her hands twisted fingers, elongating nails becoming claws. But this wasn't the slow, agonizing transformation of a first shift. This wasn't the careful, measured process that usually took minutes for someone experiencing it for the first time. This was an eruption. Rowan didn't just shift, she detonated. The transformation took 4 seconds. 4 seconds for her human form to collapse and reform into something massive and primal and utterly magnificent. 4 seconds for the wolf that had been sleeping since before she could remember to finally wake. She hit the floor on 4 legs instead of 2, and the impact cracked the hardwood. She was huge. Nearly as tall at the shoulder as Caius's own lichen form, which should have been impossible for a first shift. Her fur was iridescent silver, shimmering like liquid moonlight, catching and reflecting the firelight until she seemed to glow from within. Her eyes burned violet bright, a color so intense it looked like she had amethyst flames in her skull. And the scent that rolled off her was overwhelming. Crushed mint and ozone and lightning. The distinctive signature of pure, undiluted alpha dominance. The unmistakable marker of royal bloodline. The silver moon wolves had returned. Astrid's dagger clattered to the floor, falling from nerveless fingers. The warrior stumbled backward, her face gone sheet white with terror. "No," she whispered. "Silver moon, that's impossible. They're extinct. They've been extinct for 80 years. Rowan's wolf didn't care about Astrid's disbelief. She lunged. Her jaws closed around Astrid's shoulder, not crushing, not killing, but holding. A clear message. A conscious choice. I could end you right now. I could tear out your throat and paint these walls with your blood. But I'm choosing mercy over murder." Rowan threw her across the room, slamming her into the far wall hard enough to crack plaster. Astrid crumpled to the floor, unconscious alive, but thoroughly defeated. Rowan turned to find Draven. The brown wolf had managed to pin Caius, his massive jaws inching toward the Albino king's throat. Caius was fighting claws raking across Draven's ribs, but the challenger was larger, heavier, and had the advantage of position. Rowan drew in a breath and roared. The sound that came out of her was nothing human. It was ancient and terrible and carried the weight of lineage that predated modern pack structures. It was the voice of old wolves, the ones who'd ruled territories when humans were still learning to make fire. The remaining windows that the fight hadn't already shattered exploded outward, glass spraying into the blizzard. The sound hit Draven like a physical force. His ears flattened against his skull. His body went rigid. And despite every instinct that should have been telling him to finish Caius while he had the chance, the brown wolf found himself unable to move. Pack hierarchy wasn't just about strength. It was about bloodline, about genetic authority coded so deep in werewolf DNA that it overrode conscious thought. And Rowan's bloodline was speaking with a voice that could not be denied. Caius used the distraction. With a brutal heave, he threw Draven off his pale hands, closing around the brown wolf's throat. There was a sickening crack that echoed through the destroyed bedroom. Draven's body went limp. Silence fell, broken only by the howling blizzard and Caius's ragged breathing. The Albino king stood, slowly covered in blood, his white hair matted with it, his suit in tatters. He turned to look at Rowan's wolf, and his expression transformed into something she'd never seen before. Awe, wonder, and beneath it, a fierce protective pride. Caius dropped to one knee right there among the wreckage, and the bodies and the blood, and bowed his head. "My queen," he said, his voice rough but reverent. "My Luna, my mate." The gesture broke something open in Rowan's chest. The Albino king, the most feared alpha in the northern territories, the nightmare that other packs whispered about, was kneeling before her, acknowledging her authority, recognizing her power, recognizing her. She shifted back to human form without conscious thought, the transformation flowing like water, this time easy and natural now that the dam had broken. She stood naked among the ruins of her bedroom, silver hair falling around her shoulders, violet eyes still glowing faintly in the darkness. Caius rose and immediately shrugged out of his destroyed jacket, draping it around her shoulders. His hands lingered for just a moment, warm against her skin, and when their eyes met, the bond between them wasn't just present anymore. It was complete. Rowan could feel him now, not just emotionally but physically, like there was an invisible cord connecting her heart to his. She felt his exhaustion, his relief, his overwhelming love and pride. She felt the way he'd been holding himself together by sheer force of will, terrified that he wouldn't reach her in time. And she knew he could feel her too. Every emotion, every thought, every sensation. They were truly mated now. "We need to move," Soren's voice came from the shattered doorway. The beta's face was professionally blank, but Rowan caught the faint widening of his eyes as he took in the scene. "There are more invaders in the compound, at least 5 still active." "Take Rowan somewhere safe," Caius started to say. "No." Rowan's voice came out firm and clear. "I'm not hiding anymore." Caius looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. He nodded slowly. "Then we end this together." They descended the grand staircase side by side, Caius in his shredded suit and Rowan wrapped in his jacket like a cloak. Blood dripped from both of them, leaving a trail on the marble steps. The main hall was chaos. Pack members were scattered throughout the space, some in wolf form, some human, all of them frozen in various states of combat as they stared at the couple descending from above. The scent hit them first. Rowan's scent, fully awakened, no longer the blank void of a null, but the distinctive signature of a silver wolf. It mixed with Caius's pine and ozone, the two scents blending and amplifying each other, until the whole hall was saturated with the unmistakable marker of a completed mate bond. Then they saw her. Really saw her. The girl who'd arrived 3 weeks ago as a scentless nobody, now radiating power that made every wolf in the room want to submit. As one over 200 wolves dropped to their knees. Human form, wolf form, it didn't matter. They all knelt, heads, bowed necks, exposed in the ultimate gesture of submission and acknowledgement. "Luna," someone whispered. Then another. Then a dozen voices, 100 voices, all of them speaking the same word like a prayer. "Luna, Alpha, Luna, Alpha." Rowan's hand found Caius's, their fingers interlacing. She could feel his emotions through the bond, the fierce satisfaction and pride and love. This was her pack now, her territory, her responsibility. And God help anyone who tried to challenge that. The aftermath took hours to sort through. 10 of Draven's wolves had been killed in the fighting. 5 were captured and held in the compound's secure cells. The rest had fled when word spread that their alpha was dead and the Frost King's mate was a silver moon wolf. By dawn, Astrid was brought before them. She stood in chains, her shoulder bandaged, eyes no longer gleaming with triumph, but dull with the knowledge of complete defeat. Caius sat in his throne in the formal council chamber, Rowan standing at his right hand. The traditional position for a Luna, the position that marked her as his equal in authority. "You betrayed your alpha, your pack, and attempted to murder your Luna," Caius said, his voice cold and formal. "The sentence is banishment to the rogue lands stripped of pack status and protection. You will be escorted to the border at dawn and released. If you are ever seen in Frost territory again, the sentence is death." Astrid's mouth opened, but before she could speak, Rowan stepped forward. "Wait." Everyone turned to look at her. Caius raised an eyebrow but said nothing, giving her the floor. Rowan moved until she stood directly in front of Astrid. "You tried to kill me tonight. You conspired with enemies of this pack. You put every wolf in this compound at risk because of your ambition and jealousy." "I was trying to save this pack," Astrid began, but her voice lacked conviction. "No," Rowan said gently. "You were trying to seize power you hadn't earned. But here's what I want you to understand. I could kill you right now. One word to my mate, and he'd execute you where you stand. One command from me, and this entire pack would tear you apart." Astrid's face paled. "But I'm not going to do that," Rowan continued. "You know when, because you're going to live with the knowledge that I chose mercy when you chose murder. You're going to spend the rest of your life knowing that the null you tried to kill became the Luna who spared you. That's a heavier sentence than death could ever be." Silence filled the chamber. Then Caius stood, moving to stand beside Rowan, his hand coming to rest on the small of her back. "The Luna has spoken. The sentence stands. Take her to the cells. At dawn, she goes to the border." Guards dragged Astrid away. This time she didn't struggle. She looked broken in a way that had nothing to do with her physical injuries. 3 days after the attack, Soren brought news. "Your parents tried to flee the country," the Beta reported. "But Alpha Frost's legal team was waiting. They've been arrested. Your father faces charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and child endangerment via poisoning. Your mother is being charged as an accessory. Dr. Holloway's medical license has been revoked, and he's awaiting trial." "Good," Rowan said and meant it. "There's more." Soren hesitated. "Your sister is asking permission to visit. She's at the south gate. Says she won't leave until she sees you." Rowan looked at Caius, who nodded. "Your choice, love. If you want to see her, I'll allow it. If you never want to see her again, I'll have her turned away." "Let her in," Rowan said after a moment. Briar looked smaller than Rowan remembered. The golden girl who'd been paraded like a prize had been replaced by a 16-year-old who looked exhausted and scared. She stood in the entrance hall, eyes wide, as she took in evidence of recent battles still being repaired. "Rowan," she breathed, when her sister appeared at the top of the stairs. "Oh God, you're okay. You're more than okay. You're—" She stopped, seeming to run out of words. Rowan descended slowly, very aware of Caius a few steps behind her. "Why are you here, Briar?" "To apologize." Briar's voice broke. "To beg for your forgiveness, though I know I don't deserve it. I didn't know, Rowan. I swear I didn't know what they were doing to you. The injections, the poison, the lies. I thought you were really sick. I thought the shots were helping you." "You never questioned it?" Rowan asked quietly. Tears spilled down Briar's cheeks. "I was a child. I believed what they told me. Questioning wasn't allowed in our house. You know that. You know what they were like. She wasn't wrong. The Thorne household had been built on control and manipulation. Questioning authority hadn't been permitted for either of them. I should have protected you, Briar continued, her voice raw. I was your little sister, and I should have noticed something was wrong, should have asked more questions. Instead, I let them parade me around while you suffered. I'm so sorry, Rowan. I'm so sorry. Rowan studied her sister, saw the genuine remorse in her eyes, the guilt eating her alive. Briar had been a victim too in her own way, shaped and molded and used by their parents just as Rowan had been, just differently. I forgive you, Rowan said finally. Briar's sob was loud in the quiet hall. You shouldn't. I don't deserve. Maybe not, Rowan agreed, but I deserve to let go of the anger. I deserve to stop carrying their poison in my heart as well as my blood. So I forgive you, Briar, not because you've earned it, but because I'm choosing it. What will happen to me? Briar asked. With Mom and Dad arrested, I have nowhere to go. The pack won't take me back. I'm tainted by association. Rowan looked back at Caius, who nodded fractionally. The decision was hers. You can stay here, Rowan said. Join the Frost Pack. Pledge loyalty to me as your Luna. Start over with a clean slate, if you want it. You would do that for me. After everything, you're my sister, Rowan said simply. We were both victims of our parents' ambition, but we don't have to let that define us. We can choose something different. Briar dropped to her knees right there in the entrance hall, baring her neck in formal submission. I pledge my loyalty to Luna Rowan of the Frost Pack. My strength is yours. My service is yours. My life is yours to command. Rowan felt the pledge lock into place through the pack bonds she was still learning to navigate. Felt Briar become part of the larger network of wolves connected to her authority. Family wasn't always blood. Sometimes it was choice. 6 months passed in a blur of adjustment and revelation. Spring came to Maine in an explosion of green and wildflower purple. The snow melted, revealing the compound's gardens and the wild beauty of the coastline beyond. Rowan learned what it meant to be Luna, to hold authority over hundreds of wolves, to make decisions that affected entire communities. She established a sanctuary within Frost territory for suppressed wolves. Word had spread about what had been done to her, and others started coming forward. 12 cases in the first 3 months alone. Families who'd poisoned their children to prevent challenges to power. Packs who'd used wolfsbane to control members they saw as threats. Rowan made it her mission to find them all, to offer them safety and healing and the chance to awaken to their true potential. New pack laws were established. Mandatory independent blood screenings for all adolescents. Severe penalties for anyone caught using wolfsbane or other suppressants on pack members. Protection for genetic anomalies and those who didn't fit traditional molds. The Northern Territories were changing, and Rowan was the catalyst. One evening, Freya revealed her own secrets over tea storm cloud eyes distant with memory. I was Liana Silvermoon's personal maid, she said quietly. 60 years ago, before the line was thought to be extinct. I recognized your bloodline the moment I saw you, child. Your great-grandmother told me before she died, the silver will rise when the world needs her most. I've been waiting for a silver moon to return, and here you are. Rowan learned that Freya had been placed in Caius's household specifically to watch for signs of the bloodline's return. That the Albino king had been searching for her for 3 years, following the trail of wolfsbane purchases and genetic anomalies across the Southern Territories. He'd found her father's gambling debts by chance, but he'd used them as an excuse to get close to verify that the scentless girl hidden in the Thorne household was what he suspected. He'd paid $3.2 million not to clear a debt, but to rescue a queen who'd been locked in chains of poison and lies. On a warm May evening, Rowan stood on the cliff edge overlooking the Atlantic, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of amber and rose. Caius came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. Do you regret it? She asked quietly. Paying $3.2 million for a broken girl. She felt him smile against her neck. You were never broken, love. You were a queen in chains, and I would have paid $3.2 billion to set you free. That's excessive, Nemo. You're worth it. They shifted together as the last light faded, 2 wolves side by side on the cliff's edge. One white as winter snow eyes like frozen blood. One silver as moonlight eyes burning violet bright. They howled together into the gathering twilight, their voices carrying across the territory. A declaration, a promise, a warning to anyone who might mistake mercy for weakness or compassion for vulnerability. The Silver Luna had risen. The Northern Territories had their queen, and the world would never be the same. Far to the south, in a hospital in California, a young woman named Iris woke from surgery to to find that her eyes had changed color. Where they'd been brown before, they were now gold shot through with veins of silver. When she tried to speak to ask the nurses what had happened, her voice came out layered with a growl she'd never possessed before. And when she finally shifted 3 days later alone in her apartment, because she didn't know what else to do, she became a wolf, the color of summer wheat threaded with silver moonlight. The genetics counselor who'd been tracking unusual awakenings across North America saw her case file and immediately forwarded it to a contact in Maine. A contact named Soren, who served a Luna with violet eyes and a history of impossible transformations. The radio on Soren's desk crackled to life. Beta, we have a situation. A girl in California just shifted into a gold and silver wolf. She's asking for the silver Luna. Says she saw her in a dream and was told to come north. What are your orders? Soren looked across the office to where Rowan sat reviewing sanctuary applications, her silver hair catching the afternoon light. Luna, he said quietly, you're going to want to hear this. Rowan looked up and her violet eyes began to glow. Somewhere in the ancient genetic memory, carried in silver moon blood, she knew what this meant. The bloodline wasn't just returning, it was waking across the continent, drawn to the first true Luna in 80 years. The silver wolves were coming home, and Rowan would be there to welcome every single one, to offer them what she'd been denied for so long, witness validation and the truth that they were never broken. Just queens waiting to claim their thrones. The end was also a beginning, and the story of the silver Luna had only just started.